Elias Vance was a man who believed in systems. Closed-loop, self-sustaining, elegant. His home in the exclusive Azure Creek subdivision was a testament to that philosophy, a shimmering fortress of self-reliance in a perpetual drought zone. But that self-reliance, his careful, engineered defiance of the desert, had just earned him a death sentence delivered on glossy, linen-weave paper, $5,000. The document, titled Final Notice, Extreme Violation of Water Appropriation Bylaws, lay on the polished cedar of his kitchen island. The number, typed in heavy, unapologetic black, seemed to warp the air around it. $5 million. It wasn't a fine. It was a punitive financial execution, engineered to liquidate him, his house, and his entire life savings. The supposed transgression? His state-of-the-art, fully contained rainwater capture and filtration system, discreetly integrated into the roofline and underground cisterns. It's absurd, Elias. Utterly, criminally absurd, muttered his wife Clara, her voice tight with a fear that hadn't sounded this resonant since the market crash a decade ago. She was gripping the edge of the granite counter, her knuckles white. The community runs on rules for landscaping, for paint colors, not for survival. We're in a level 4 drought. We save the reservoir thousands of gallons a month. Elias didn't look up from the document. He was an architect, not a lawyer, but he understood malice. He reread the section they cited, a vague, convoluted passage about communal resource management and diversion of shared flow. It was boilerplate, ancient, pulled from the original 1980s covenants before this land was anything but sun-baked scrub. And it did not, by any stretch of logic or law, justify a $5 million penalty. It's not about the rule, Clara, Elias said, his voice flat, the calm before a hurricane. He tapped the page where the signature block stood, Brenda Sterling, board president. It's about Brenda and power. They want this house, or they want me broken. Brenda Sterling, the reigning queen of Azure Creek HOA, ruled with the serene, unblinking authority of a corporate tyrant. Her reign was one of relentless expansion, draconian enforcement, and an opaque, untouchable budget. Elias had been a constant, civilized annoyance. The man who asked too many questions at quarterly meetings, the one who publicly pointed out the 20% discrepancy in the irrigation budget. He was the grain of sand in her well-oiled machine. You need to call Attorney Gaines, Clara pleaded, her composure finally fracturing. Now, before they put a lien on the deed. Gaines will cost us $50,000 just to file a motion to dismiss this nonsense, Elias countered, rising. He ran a hand over his tired face. And Brenda knows that. She's betting I don't have the stomach for a war of attrition. She thinks I'll fold, negotiate it down to $100,000, and rip out the system to make her happy. He crumpled the notice into a tight, hard ball. She's wrong. Elias drove the next morning, not to Gaines's office, but to the HOA headquarters, a low, aggressively modern glass box they called the Governance Center. It sat like a cold, glittering snake at the heart of the community, smelling faintly of new carpet and old money. He marched past the startled receptionist and into the boardroom, where Brenda Sterling was already seated, her silver hair pulled back in a severe knot, presiding over a meticulously organized stack of folders. She didn't look up immediately. Her silence was a weapon designed to make him feel small and rash. "You're not on the agenda, Mr. Vance," she finally said, her voice like ice clinking in an expensive glass. She didn't offer a greeting or even an acknowledgement of the absurdity of the situation. Elias placed the crumpled fine notice on the table, smoothing it out with deliberate, angry care. "The fine, $5 million. I'm here to understand the genesis of that figure. Brenda. The figure is commensurate with the potential damage to the community's resource pool and the egregious unilateral violation of Article 4, subsection 7, she recited, her gaze steady, devoid of emotion. Your system, by capturing and utilizing rainfall, constitutes a diversion of water that, by rights, should contribute to the Azure Creek aquifer, and, consequently, the community's centralized reservoir. It is essentially theft of a shared utility," Elias scoffed, leaning his hands on the table. "Theft? That water was falling on my roof." It evaporates, or it runs into the storm drain and out to the river. I've calculated the volume. At peak capacity, my cistern holds 3,000 gallons. The entire community's annual consumption is measured in the hundreds of million gallons. $5 million is not a commensurate penalty, Brenda. It's an extortion attempt. One of the board members, a nervous man named Arthur, who always seemed on the verge of apologizing for his own existence, cleared his throat. Elias, the board voted unanimously. The fine is not negotiable. Unanimously? Elias turned to him, his intensity momentarily cracking Arthur's veneer. Did any of you read the volume numbers? Or did you just see the violator Vance on the memo and sign on the dotted line because Brenda told you to? Brenda finally stood, resting her palms on the table. Her eyes narrowed. You misunderstand the gravity of the situation. Mr. Vance, you have 72 hours to pay the fine, or we will commence foreclosure proceedings per the covenants, conditions, and restrictions agreement you signed. She leaned in slightly. We don't need to argue the why of the fine. We only need to enforce the fact of the fine. Now, unless you are presenting a certified check for $5 million, you are trespassing. The sheer arrogance of it, the institutionalized cruelty, hit Elias like a physical blow. He felt the blood rush to his ears. It wasn't just a financial threat. It was a psychological assault designed to paralyze him. He straightened up slowly. The fine is a smokescreen, Brenda, he whispered, low enough that only she could hear it, injecting the word with pure, cold certainty. You're trying to cover something big up, and the only way you charge someone $5 million for 3,000 gallons of water is if you are yourself, stealing on a scale so massive that my rainwater system looks like a child's leaky faucet. Her smile was sharp and fleeting. Good luck with your theory, Mr. Vance. You have 71 hours and 45 minutes remaining. He left the governance center, the taste of defeat mingling with the metallic tang of an adrenaline spike. He wasn't going to hire a lawyer. He was going to hire a detective, one with a background in municipal infrastructure, which, conveniently, was himself. Back home in the quiet solitude of his study, Elias pulled up the Azure Creek financials and the Department of Water Resources public-facing documents. The HOA was obligated to file monthly usage reports. He started cross-referencing the water purchased from the county utility versus the volume billed to residents, plus the reservoir's seasonal drawdowns. The discrepancy he'd noticed months ago wasn't gone. It had widened. Over the last 4 quarters, a total of 97 million gallons of water, enough to fill the community reservoir twice over, was simply gone. It had been purchased by the HOA, paid for with resident dues, but never billed to residents, never accounted for as leakage, which was separately documented, and never stored in the reservoir. It had vanished into the network of pipes, at million gallons. At the county's current commercial bulk rate, that was over $800,000 worth of water a year. It wasn't incompetence. It was a continuous, deliberate extraction. And the $5 fine? It was designed to consume every second of his focus, every dollar of his reserve, ensuring he couldn't afford to look at the books. Elias spent the rest of the day in the sun-scorched underbelly of Azure Creek, the maintenance tunnels, the overgrown utility easements, the fenced-off concrete access points that snaked along the community's southern border. He was searching for an anomaly. He finally found it near the boundary wall, past the manicured golf course greens, where the subdivision property line met the wild, unprotected desert. There was an old, poorly maintained pumping station, labeled innocuously as Auxiliary Irrigation Substation D, that hadn't been listed in the latest capital improvement inventory. It was surrounded by a rusty chain-link fence, ostensibly to protect it from wildlife. He checked the concrete pad. It was new, too new. The surrounding soil looked disturbed. Waiting until the dead of night, Elias returned. He brought his field kit, high-powered night vision binoculars, a directional microphone, and the one piece of equipment that proved his architectural genius extended beyond blueprints, a ground-penetrating radar unit, the size of a small suitcase designed for non-destructive structural analysis. The air was heavy and still, smelling of dry dust and ozone. Elias scaled the fence easily, his heart beating a fast, heavy rhythm against his ribs. He deployed the GPR, running it in slow, deliberate lines across the new concrete pad and into the desert soil beyond the property line. The first few scans showed nothing but bedrock and utility conduit. Then, over the low-frequency drone of the GPR, a new, distinct signature appeared on the screen. A massive, straight metallic line, significantly larger than the standard 12-inch community main, running not towards the reservoir, but away from Azure Creek's border and deep into the unorganized desert territory. It was a phantom pipe, buried deep enough to evade casual inspection, too large for mere auxiliary irrigation. It was a dedicated high-capacity pipeline, secretly fed by the HOA's purchasing power. Elias packed up the GPR, the sweat on his forehead cold despite the heat. He didn't need... The black SUV idled, its high beams cutting through the desert night, holding Elias Vance suspended in pure, hostile white light. The voice, mechanical and clipped, hung in the air. "You should have paid the fine, Mr. Vance. You're diving in water too deep for a man who builds houses." Elias didn't move. He stood, framed in the doorway of his $1 million home, feeling the cold press of the surveillance. This was not the work of a disgruntled HOA manager. This was the language of protection, of private security, of a threat professionally delivered. He heard the soft click of the electric lock engaging on his front door behind him, a sound Clara always made when she was terrified and trying to be silent. The car remained for 3 more heart-stopping seconds. Then the high beams dipped, and the SUV glided away without a sound. Leaving the street unnervingly dark, Elias walked inside, his architect's mind already building contingency plans, defenses, and exits. Clara was standing in the foyer, her face pale, the fear in her eyes having crystallized into something sharp and accusing. "Who was that, Elias?" she demanded, her voice a strained whisper. "That wasn't Brenda's lawyer. That was a warning. A real warning." He took off his dusty jacket, trying to appear unconcerned. "Just some muscle, Clara, trying to scare me out of my investigation." "Investigation? You call it investigation. They call it intrusion. They're running a crime, Elias. A massive $800,000 a year crime. We don't fight cartels. We hire a lawyer, pay them what we can, and try to settle this before they take everything." She gestured wildly towards the kitchen, where the fine still sat like a toxic ledger. "They're not just going to take the house. They're going to ruin you professionally. They'll blacklist you from every development deal in the state." Elias caught her hands, his grip firm. "And what happens if I stop? If I pull out the rainwater system, swallow the fine, and pay them off? They will know I saw the books. They know I found the phantom pipe. They don't want my money, Clara. They want my silence. And the only way to buy that silence is not with surrender, but with exposure." He steered her towards the study. He needed to show her the data, to convert her fear into a desperate kind of resolve. He projected the GPR image onto the wall, the thick, dark line of the illegal pipeline running across the desert boundary, next to the Orion Bottling Company logo he'd pulled from the internet. "Look at this," Elias said, tapping the projected images. "This pipe is their jugular. We have the financial discrepancies, the GPR evidence of the line, and the illegal pump logs. But it's all circumstantial until I have a photo of that pipe physically connected to Orion's intake manifold. That's the smoking gun that goes straight to the Department of Justice, not just the County Water Board." Clara stared at the wall, her breath ragged. "You're talking about breaking into a secured industrial facility." "You're an architect, Elias, not a spy. They just sent a car to our house." "The only thing that car told me," Elias said, a cold, hard resolve settling in his stomach, "is that I was close enough to spook them. They are reactive. I need to be proactive, tonight. I need to go to Orion now, before they can secure the auxiliary station or move the pipe." The ensuing fight was not loud, but it was brutal. It was about risk, responsibility, and the fundamental question of when principle outweighs self-preservation. In the end, Elias convinced her not with logic, but with the stark emotional truth. He could not live with himself knowing he had capitulated to corporate thieves who were literally siphoning the lifeblood out of the arid community they governed. Clara, recognizing the immutable stubbornness and justice in her husband's eyes, didn't agree to his plan, but she stopped fighting it. Her concession was a silent, trembling acceptance. The Orion Bottling Company facility was a monument to industrial anonymity. Windowless concrete, razor wire fences, and a landscape devoid of anything living. It was 3 miles from the Azure Creek boundary wall, accessible only by a crumbling access road that had likely been abandoned for decades, except for the daily traffic over the newly buried pipeline. Elias had stripped his car of anything identifiable and parked a mile away, nestled behind a ridge of ancient, sun-blasted granite. He moved the rest of the distance on foot, traversing the uneven terrain in a pair of military-grade hiking boots, carrying only his essential field kit: a lightweight thermal scope, a high-resolution, low-light camera with a telephoto lens, and a small, battery-powered drone, his last resort for getting aerial imagery. He reached the perimeter wall of Orion just after midnight. The section facing the desert was dimly lit by security floodlights, but the area where the phantom pipe terminated was conveniently shrouded by an oversized, dilapidated utility shed. Using the GPR readings as his guide, Elias found the precise point where the pipe crossed under the perimeter wall. The ground here was packed gravel, not the telltale disturbed dirt near the HOA pump house. They had covered their tracks professionally on the receiving end. He deployed the thermal scope. The pipe, being filled with 97 million gallons of moving water, registered a faint, distinctive temperature signature as it entered the facility. The line didn't go to the main municipal intake. It went directly to a secondary large pump house near the back, completely separate from the primary water processing area. Elias had to get closer to the connection point to get a photo proving the link. The gate nearest him was secured by a heavy magnetic lock. He didn't have the tools to breach it silently, and he couldn't risk the noise. He instead moved along the wall until he reached the utility shed. It was large, aluminum, and built low to the ground. A single flimsy padlock secured the entry door. A pair of bolt cutters from his kit made quick work of it. Inside, the shed was a suffocating maze of old pallets, discarded filtration cartridges, and industrial chemicals. But it provided the perfect, shielded vantage point. He crept to the back wall of the shed. The wall itself was just corrugated metal, easy to cut. Elias used a battery-powered jigsaw, cutting a square opening just large enough for his camera lens, working slowly and deliberately, masking the rasping metallic noise with the distant, steady hum of the bottling plant's HVAC system. It took 10 agonizing minutes. He peered through the small, raw opening. Bingo. 15 feet away was the back of the secondary pump house, and running into its concrete foundation was a massive 18-inch blue pipe, the telltale HDPE plastic that matched the phantom pipe's GPR signature, connecting directly to a control valve labeled, not with municipal water, but with a cryptic internal code, A's CRK Pump 4. This was it, the visual confirmation. Elias raised his camera, setting the ISO high for the low light, and began firing the shutter. Click, whir, click, whir. He captured the pipe, the foundation, the cryptic label, and then used the telephoto to capture the overall scene, the Orion building in the background. The photographs were irrefutable proof that the Azure Creek HOA, through its auxiliary pump station, was illegally feeding a multinational bottling operation. As he was taking his last shot, a new noise cut through the ambient hum, the heavy thud of a vehicle door closing nearby, followed by the crunch of boots on gravel. Elias froze, pressing himself against the wall of the shed. He peered through the hole again. 2 men, both wearing the charcoal gray uniform of Orion Bottling Security, but moving with the practiced stealth of former military, were walking directly toward the secondary pump house. They were making a routine patrol, but they were headed straight for his vantage point. Elias frantically grabbed a greasy tarpaulin and draped it over the hole he had cut, covering the metal debris on the ground. He retreated to the darkest corner of the shed, behind a precarious stack of pallets, his heart hammering against his ribs. He heard their voices, muffled by the shed's thin walls, but close. "Still running at 100%, one man said, his voice heavy. "Yeah. The Sterling woman is nervous. Says the water board is starting to ask why the community reservoir is 3 feet low this quarter, the second replied. Tell her to chill out. It's all within spec. The flow meters are set to report a 10% variance. They'll blame evaporation. This pipe? Nobody knows about this pipe but the 4 of us and Sterling. Elias silently clicked his camera to video, holding it steady, capturing the audio of their confession. He didn't dare move the lens to the hole. What about that guy, Vance? The architect. She seemed pretty keyed up about him. $5 million fine for collecting rain? Hilarious, the first man grunted. He's handled. Had a little visit last night. He tries anything, he won't make it to the community meeting next week. I've got eyes on his house. He moves. We move. The sheer casualness of the threat. He moves. We move. Sent a paralyzing spike of terror through Elias. They were professionals. They were tracking him, and they intended to neutralize him permanently if he pushed too hard. The 2 guards walked around the pump house, their voices fading slightly before the sound of a heavy key turning in the pump house door echoed. They were doing an inspection of the internal controls. Elias knew he had perhaps 2 minutes before they finished their check and inevitably circled back to patrol the shed area. He had the photos, the video, and the audio. It was enough. He needed to get out. He crept back to the flimsy, padlocked door, slipped out, and pulled the door shut, twisting the broken padlock back into its latch to give the appearance. The high-pitched wail of the fire engine and the officious drone of the fire marshal's voice instantly shredded the suburban calm. 2 massive red trucks, emblems of public safety, were now tools of Brenda Sterling's erasure. Elias Vance, framed in his doorway, stared at the marshal, a stocky man named Harris, whose eyes held the dull, practiced glaze of someone following orders without question. Hazardous apparatus. Sir, Marshal Harris repeated, gesturing toward the roof. We have received a full hazmat response call-out. We must secure the perimeter and neutralize the threat. Step away. There is no hazard, Elias stated, his voice tight, but the sound of his conviction was swallowed by the sudden hiss of air brakes and the clamor of firefighters deploying equipment. That is a closed-loop filtration system. It holds clean rainwater. This is a false report. Marshal Harris pulled a laminated card from his clipboard. The report specifies an unpermitted underground cistern containing combustible materials in proximity to the house's main gas line. We are not debating the validity, Mr. Vance. We are executing an emergency seizure. Any attempt to obstruct is a felony. Clara, standing just behind Elias, reached out and grabbed his arm, her nails digging into his skin. Elias, the cards. Give me the SD cards! Get out of here! In a split-second calculation, Elias realized he couldn't hide the evidence on his person or his wife's. If they were arrested, the evidence would be impounded. He needed to place it in the one place no one would think to look. The one place he knew better than anyone. The structure of the house itself. The blueprints, Elias muttered, adrenaline flooding his system with a hyper-awareness. The cavity! He shoved Clara back and lunged not toward the interior, but toward the corner of the foyer wall, where a small, decorative piece of molding met the floor. It was a section he had designed himself, knowing the space behind it was a structural necessity for cable runs and a perfect, dry micro-safe. Stop! Halt, sir! Marshal Harris bellowed. Elias dropped to one knee, ignoring the shouted commands. He ripped open his camera bag, pulled out the tiny SD card containing the photos, audio, and pump logs, and using the edge of his car key, he popped the small molding section loose. With the fire marshal sprinting toward him, Elias shoved the card into the dark recess. The molding clicked back into place barely a second before Harris tackled him hard. The impact sent Elias sliding across the polished wood floor. He felt the wind knocked out of him, the air thick with the smell of dust and Harris's cheap cologne. You are resisting a municipal emergency order, Harris shouted, pinning Elias's shoulders. Elias, run! Clara screamed, already fleeing toward the back of the house. The confusion was all Elias needed. He twisted his body, rolling away from the heavier marshal, scrambling to his feet. He didn't waste time going after Clara. They had prearranged an emergency rally point outside the community. He took one last desperate look at his foyer wall, a silent promise to the hidden card, and vaulted over the kitchen island. heading for the sliding glass doors that led to the backyard. As he burst through the doors, the sound of glass shattering behind him, likely a forced entry by the fire crew, spurred him forward. He cut through his impeccably manicured landscaping, vaulted the low wall separating his property from the desert wash, and plunged into the dry, rocky terrain. He ran, the $5 million fine, the flyers, and the betrayal fueling every stride. He was a fugitive, chased by the very institutions he paid taxes to support. 2 hours later, Elias and Clara rendezvoused at a dusty, forgotten gas station 50 miles away, a place they used to stop on long weekend drives. They sat in their stripped-down, anonymous sedan. The windows steamed from the rising desert heat, trying to reconcile their lives with the sudden reality of being homeless and hunted. "I called Attorney Gaines's office," Clara whispered, her voice raw. "They won't take our calls." His receptionist said the firm has a conflict of interest with a major community client. "Orion has their hooks in deep," Elias concluded, running a weary hand through his hair. "Gaines won't touch it because Brenda controls the legal fees for the entire HOA, which is a massive client pool." "What about the cards?" "Hidden," Elias said simply. "In the foyer molding. The small piece by the electrical conduit. They won't find it without a demolition order, which they'll get eventually, but it buys us time. We can't go back for it yet. If they find us, they find the evidence. Their immediate problem was security and resources. Elias had $900 cash and 2 burner phones. They couldn't stay together. It made them too easy to track. They needed help, and Elias knew only one man who hated Azure Creek's current administration more than he did. "Arthur Thorne," Elias said, pulling up an old, forgotten contact on his phone. Clara frowned. "The former city engineer? He hasn't worked for the Municipal Water Authority in 20 years. They forced him out." "Exactly," Elias replied, a faint, cold smile touching his lips. "He was the chief engineer when Azure Creek was initially developed in the 80s. He knows the skeleton under the skin of that community better than anyone. He knows what corners were cut, what was buried, and who paid for the silence. And he was thrown out by the exact corporate cronies who are running this scheme now. Arthur Thorne was living a quiet, bitter retirement in a cluttered workshop on the outskirts of the nearest town. He was a man made of rust and stubborn integrity. When Elias called, Thorne was immediately wary. "Vance, I saw the flyers. Fraud, hazmat, $5 million. You're radioactive." Thorne's voice rasped over the cheap burner phone. "They're not after rainwater, Arthur," Elias cut in, ignoring the accusations. "They're siphoning 97 million gallons a year out of the system and piping it to Orion Bottling. I have the proof, but they seized my house. I need to know what you know about the original infrastructure, the real plans, before the redevelopment that Sterling pushed through 5 years ago." Silence stretched on the line, thick and heavy. Thorne, the old engineer, was processing the scale of the accusation. Finally, he spoke, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "The pipe is a symptom, Elias, not the disease. Azure Creek has a hidden problem. It always did. When I was pushed out, I had just finished the report on the primary storage facility, the community reservoir. It's not a standard lining. The original developer saved millions by using a composite liner that was substandard, meant to degrade after 20 years. I flagged it. I was ignored. They shelved the report." Elias felt a chilling realization. "Brenda Sterling pushed through a modernization 5 years ago. Did she replace the liner?" "No," Thorne scoffed. "She claimed they were upgrading the filtration matrix and pocketed the money. The liner is 40 years old and brittle. If the water level drops too fast, the hydrostatic pressure shifts, and that liner will shatter. That reservoir isn't just low, Elias. It's fragile. It's a bomb. Why would she care about the reservoir shattering if she's diverting the water to Orion?" "Because," Thorne explained, his voice laced with old anger, "when that thing fails, it won't be a slow leak. It'll be a catastrophic breach. Azure Creek is built in a floodplain. They would have a massive disaster on their hands, and the developer, the HOA, and everyone involved would be facing criminal negligence charges for the ensuing property damage and loss of life." Elias realized the true, horrifying complexity of the crime. Brenda Sterling wasn't just stealing water to make a profit. She was diverting the water to keep the dangerously substandard reservoir from shattering, trying to artificially maintain a safe hydrostatic level in a community that was already in drought. The $5 million fine wasn't just a smokescreen for theft, it was a frantic, desperate attempt to silence the one person whose focus on water management, the rainwater system, put him in a position to expose the instability of the entire community's water supply. She's trapped, Elias breathed. She has to steal water to keep the reservoir intact. But the theft is what's depleting the reserve and making the water board ask questions. She's playing a game of chicken with a bomb, Thorne confirmed. Get me your evidence, Vance. I'll analyze the GPR data against the original structural surveys. If I can find the access point to the reservoir's internal monitoring station, we can broadcast the real-time pressure readings. That will prove the imminent danger and force a municipal takeover before she can cover it up. Elias had a new target, the reservoir, the symbolic heart of the community that was actually a ticking time bomb. The risk was enormous. Brenda had eyes on him, and the reservoir was the most secured, controlled area in Azure Creek. He told Clara to drive south to a pre-agreed safe house, a relative's cabin in the mountains, and wait. He knew she had to be safe out of the line of fire. He needed to be free to move. He gave her his wallet and everything he had except the burner phone. "I'm going back," Elias told her, the words tasting like copper and certainty. "Elias, no." "You just escaped," Clara pleaded, tears welling up in her eyes. "I know where she's vulnerable now," he insisted. "It's not the pipe. It's the pressure. I'm going to get the cards, and then I'm going to the dam. I'll get the real story out, I have to. For all those people who just read that flyer and thought I was a criminal." He left Clara and drove Thorne's way. He needed a plan to get the cards and get to the dam in the next 24 hours. Thorne could only give him coordinates and the knowledge. The infi. The voice echoed, amplified and distorted by the cavernous concrete chamber, resonating with a terrifying absolute authority. "You really should have paid the fine, Elias. We offered you a $5 million chance to live." Brenda Sterling stood silhouetted in the tunnel entrance, dressed in a sleek charcoal pantsuit, completely out of place against the damp, mineral-stained backdrop. She wasn't just holding a tablet. She was holding a customized command module, a physical manifestation of her control over the disaster she had engineered. Her eyes, usually cold, now burned with the zealotry of a cornered tyrant. "The fine wasn't the goal, was it, Brenda?" Elias said, his back pressed against the cold, sweating concrete wall, his eyes darting between her and the small, blinking red light on the bomb apparatus. The old, massive analog pressure gauge, redlined at caution structural limit, seemed to hum with silent dread. The fine was the distraction. The cover for the smear campaign. "You needed to liquidate me because you knew I saw the missing water and might expose the rotten liner." Brenda smiled, a tight, vicious expression of pure malice. "The liner is 40 years old, Vance. It's a liability." Every HOA board before mine swept that structural deficiency report under the rug. "I didn't create the bomb. I just inherited the detonator. When I took over, the water levels were already too low, and the hydrostatic pressure was beginning to crack the shell. I had two choices. Spend $90 million to replace the liner, an expense that would bankrupt every homeowner in Azure Creek, including you, or manage the water supply until a drought-breaking rainy season gave us a cushion." She stepped forward, her voice dropping, forcing Elias to strain to hear her over the low, constant drip of water somewhere in the darkness. Orion offered the solution. A high-volume contract that pays for our operational costs and keeps the reservoir at a safe, low level. It's profitable, it stabilizes the pressure, and it keeps the water board off my back. It was a masterpiece of compromise, Elias. Until you started harvesting your little puddle of rain. Elias realized the true, horrifying irony. She wasn't just a thief. She was a corrupt pragmatist who had traded the community's water supply for its temporary structural stability, using the community's own money and infrastructure to profit from the necessary theft. "And the bomb?" Elias challenged, gesturing toward the chemical device aimed at the support pillar. "Is that part of the masterpiece of compromise?" "That," Brenda said, her finger hovering inches above a large red button on the tablet, is my insurance policy. If the pressure drops too fast, or if an obsessive busybody like yourself proves the liner is compromised, the panic will be devastating. They will prosecute the board, the developer, and the contractors. Me. I can't allow that. A localized, controlled breach that creates a massive, immediate flood, a natural disaster, perhaps caused by a faulty monitoring box, destroys the physical evidence of the liner failure and the theft, redirects the investigation and allows me to escape with my profits and my reputation intact. She pointed to the digital broadcast box, the one Elias had identified as the false reading transmitter. You were going to use Thorne's old gauge to broadcast the truth. But that device is the master switch. It controls the false reading, the local network, and the chemical release. Touch it, and I press this. Elias felt a cold dread settle in his stomach. He was facing a calculated psychopath with a doomsday device. He had to assume she had security outside the tunnel entrance, likely the same two men from Orion's facility. He needed a distraction, and he needed it now. You're not doing this for the community, Brenda. You're doing it because you cut a deal with Orion that enriched you. And now you have to destroy thousands of people's homes to cover your tracks, Elias spat, trying to inject enough contempt to draw her attention fully. The contempt worked. Brenda's face flushed with fury. You have no idea what it takes to manage this many entitled people. I keep their pools full and their lawns green. And you... She took a step closer, her voice laced with venom. You are just a failed architect who can't stand that someone else built a system more successful than yours. Now tell me where the SD card is. The original evidence from the bottling plant. Tell me and I will let you walk away right now. I destroyed it. Elias lied easily, maintaining rock-solid eye contact. I shredded it before the fire marshal got to the door. Brenda's jaw tightened. She didn't believe him. She lowered the tablet slightly, a flicker of doubt crossing her eyes. This was his chance. Elias had noticed a minor detail when he first entered. The old analog pressure gauge, Thorne NG, was not just a gauge. It had an old heavy-duty service valve on the pipe leading into it, a relic of 1980s engineering that had been bypassed but not removed. He didn't know what it connected to, but any massive pipe valve near a dam was a threat. The modem, Elias said, pointing past Brenda, is going to broadcast the truth, whether you press that button or not, because the truth is already out. As Brenda instinctively spun around to look at the digital box, Elias made his move. He didn't run. He lunged not for her, but for the old service valve next to the analog gauge. He grabbed the valve wheel, a massive rusted piece of iron, and threw his entire body weight into it, turning it counterclockwise with a violent, screeching grind. The sound was ear-splitting. A grating metallic shriek that echoed off the chamber walls. The ancient pipe, long dormant, screamed in protest. Brenda wheeled back around, her eyes wide with shock. The valve held for a terrifying second, and then, with a deafening K-boom, the connection point ruptured. It wasn't the main water supply, but a high-pressure line designed to equalize water levels in the lower spillway. A torrent of foul, stagnant water, millions of gallons under immense pressure, erupted from the crack, hitting the opposite wall of the chamber like a cannon shot. The pressure wave and the noise were instantly disorienting. The chamber was plunged into a chaotic, echoing hell of noise and spray. The valve! Brenda screamed, dropping the tablet slightly in her panic as the spray, thick with sediment, rained down on her. Elias, soaked and partially deafened, ignored her. He scrambled up the sheer rock face next to the support pillar, reaching the modem box. He knew he didn't have time to dismantle the bomb. He had to focus on the broadcast. He ripped the protective casing off the digital box, exposing the circuit board. The small industrial-grade modem, the one responsible for broadcasting the false safe reading, was connected by a single, thin network cable. Using the edge of the thermal cutter Thorne had given him, Elias jammed the sharp metal tip into the network port, twisting and destroying the connection. The modem's lights immediately went dark. The false reading broadcast stopped. Brenda, realizing her signal was gone and her system was compromised, let out a guttural cry of rage. She raised the remote trigger, pointing it directly at Elias. "You fool! You've ruined the clean escape. You die for this!" Elias knew the blast would kill him, but he also knew the catastrophic consequences for the community. In a final, desperate act, he yanked the modem completely off the wall, exposing the wiring beneath. He found the simple power supply wires for the false reading unit and twisted them together with a pair of pliers he still had in his pocket. The twisted wires caused a massive surge. The ancient analog gauge, no longer being bypassed by the digital system, suddenly received a direct, unfiltered signal from the failing structural components. With the digital lie dead, the true catastrophic pressure reading was now visible. And then, Elias did something Brenda never expected. He jammed the exposed modem directly into the stream of high-pressure water erupting from the broken valve, short-circuiting every remaining component of the digital system. Brenda screamed and lunged at him, but Elias was already sliding back down the rock face toward the spillway tunnel. He heard her thumb slam down on the red trigger button. Nothing happened. The bomb, which relied on the now fried digital monitoring box for its internal timer and detonation sequence, was inert. The main power relay had been overloaded by the surge. Brenda's control, her insurance policy, was useless. Elias sprinted down the tunnel, the screams of the valve and the rush of water chasing him. He heard Brenda's footsteps, followed by a new, more terrifying sound. The shouted commands of the two Orion security guards who had clearly been waiting outside, now entering the tunnel. He burst out of the auxiliary spillway access gate, scrambling to pull the hatch closed as the guards' flashlights swept down the tunnel. The noise of the ruptured valve was so loud, it served as both a beacon and a temporary cover. He didn't stop running. He plunged back into the dark scrub. He was soaking wet, deafened by the noise, but alive. He glanced back and saw a glimmer of light, not the guards' flashlights, but the pulsing, bright red light of an emergency flare tossed by Brenda, marking his position on the dam structure. Elias ran until he hit the access road. He was a mile from his car, hunted, and now publicly exposed by a flare on top of a dam. He didn't have the SD card yet, but as he ran, he pulled out his burner phone. He saw a notification. When he had briefly connected the power supply wires to overload the system, he had accidentally created a brief, untraceable surge strong enough to override the local firewall and send a single, compressed data packet into the public domain. It wasn't the photos of the pipe.